Hello and welcome to this session for the Neuroendocrine Cancer UK Virtual Patient Summit in 2021. My name's Dr. Julie Denning. I'm a health psychologist and I work for a company called Working to Wellbeing, and today I'm going to talk to you about returning to work support. Okay, so just to introduce you to Working to Wellbeing, so we're providers of specialist vocational rehabilitation and work support services, and we specialise in assisting people with chronic conditions to return to function and return to work. It was founded by myself and by my colleague Nicola Hunter, who is an occupational health physiotherapist. We design interventions that are evidence-based and enable people to manage their illness or condition and to return to work. If you wanted to see more about our company, you could go to the website there. Okay, so the session aims are going to be the following. So I'm thinking about how we can help you to reflect on your perceptions, concerns and worries regarding returning to work and cancer, to discuss the role of work both during and after treatment, to think about your symptoms and how they can be managed in the workplace, to consider how to liaise with HR or your line manager, and to look at how we can go about designing a phased return to work plan accounting for reasonable adjustments. Okay, so first of all, what I want you to do is to switch your focus for a minute and just think about you, and to think about where you're at in your return to work thinking, and what your needs and concerns and thoughts are on this topic. Okay, so let's just think about you and work and where you're at in terms of returning to work. So there are a couple of different options here, and I just want you to think, where am I at this point in time? So it could be that it's just not on your radar at all, it's a long way off, that's absolutely fine. It might not just be as part of your immediate agenda, so you're not putting any thought to it at this point in time. Or it could be that you're starting to think about it and thinking, crikey, yeah, actually I really would like to think about returning to work. I'm coming towards the end of the treatment pathway, or I'm feeling so much better and I'm actually starting to think about what that return to work might look like. Or are you someone who's actually already planning a return? So you've got a date in the diary, you've got your ducks in a row, so you've spoken to your line manager, perhaps you've spoken to occupational health, you might have spoken to a vocational rehabilitation provider who's helping you with your planned return to work, so you might be in that planning stage. Or maybe you've already actually started your return and you're in the early doors of a phased return, and you're just building up your strength and stamina and your cognitive capacity and getting back into the groove of work. Or actually perhaps you're somebody who's already at work on normal hours, but maybe you're thinking there's just a few niggles out there that you'd quite like to resolve, some things to make your quality of life at work just a little bit better. So just have that chance to think, where are you at the moment in terms of work? Okay, so now what I want to turn our attention to is thinking still on work and focusing on that. Well, think about the role of work during and after treatment. So depending where you're at, I guess, in your thinking about return to work, it's useful sometimes to think about the benefits of work, which doesn't often get talked about. But actually there's huge benefit to returning to work, particularly if it's good work. And those benefits can include things like obviously financial reward. It's about a structure to your day, having to get up and get ready, engage with your team, do the work, have lunch, do some more work, finish. There's a nice structure to the day, and then you turn your attention to your home life. So it provides that structure. It provides the opportunity for social support. So to have a laugh with your colleagues, to interact and socialise with people, to have that kind of connection with other people. And it can also just help your mood. It might also improve your physical strength and stamina depending on the sort of job that you're doing. And very much we tend to look at work as part of the rehabilitation process. It enables people to further build up their strength and stamina, to further build up their cognitive capacity, and we see it as part of that recovery journey, if you like, that recovery process, and work fits into that process. But I guess you want to be thinking about, when you're weighing up going back to work, you're going to be thinking about the benefits and the drawbacks of that for you. In terms of, are you ready? Do you feel like you have your symptoms well managed enough to be able to return to work? It might be that a drawback for you could be, for example, since COVID lockdown and a change in working practices, people are now working from home, and that might be a little bit daunting for you. And you might be thinking, I don't know how I'm going to cope in that environment. How am I going to set myself up? How's it going to work? How am I going to keep connected with my team? So for you, there might be a number of drawbacks at this point in time. And we're going to be thinking about that today, of like what your concerns are and how we can maybe start to address those for you. So when you're sort of ready and you're thinking about returning to work and thinking about planning your return to work, some of the things that can help you are the following. So first of all, really taking a structured approach to that return to work journey. So it's reflecting on what your needs are, and they can be physical, psychological, cognitive, emotional, practical, and kind of thinking through in a very organised fashion how you're going to address each of those needs. It's useful to start thinking about how you're going to have conversations with your workplace and thinking about what that would look like, and thinking about how you're going to manage your own and other people's expectations in terms of returning to work. So really thinking, crikey, well, I think I can return, but I know that my colleagues have often said to me, well, don't rush back too quickly, or really take good care of yourself. And I feel like taking good care of myself is returning back to the workplace. So you've got to be thinking about how am I going to manage what I think I can do, what other people are also expecting of me, and get that really lovely balance so that when my return to work comes, it's a nice, smooth process. And I think what's really important to consider as part of this is that actually you set your expectations in a realistic way. I think sometimes our drive to do things can get in the way of actually reflecting on what actually are we able to do. So for example, our need to please, or our need to support our team who might be really short-staffed at the minute, could really do with another pair of hands, and you're just those pair of hands to help. But it's really important to remember what your needs are, and they don't get consumed by other people's needs in that sense. So it's about thinking, well, what can I actually do here, and how do I manage that and explain to other people. So a classic mistake we sometimes see with return to work plans is that people say they're going to work, for argument's sake, between 10 and 2, and then sometimes there's creep, and someone rings them up at 2 o'clock and they take the call, or they'll say, yeah, I'll just get this, I'll work till job done, and they maybe don't finish till 2:30. And it's about thinking about the message that then sends to other people, which is like, oh, they're around, they're free, I'll give them a call, and then there can be just increasing creep, and before you know it, you're doing a 10 till 3 day instead of a 10 till 2, for example. And actually it's really important when you're doing your phased return to work that you do look after yourself, and that you do keep to the plan that was arranged, and also that everybody is on the same page. There's lots of clarity about the process, and it just makes everybody else know where they stand, and will make it much easier for you too. Okay, so what we found can be really helpful for people is actually just to identify and reflect and spend some time thinking about, what are your biggest concerns about returning to work. And these might be things that are sort of ruminating, if they're on your mind a lot, but write them down and kind of get them in a nice orderly way. And it might be something you start the list and then you go away and do something, and then you come back, and it might be a work in progress, this list of just collecting all those worries and concerns. And then once you've kind of got them, you either take them one by one or as a group, and just thinking, well, how am I going to start to address those? So start to actively problem solve. And it might be you need to get another brain in the mix, a friend, a colleague, your partner, a loved one, family, someone else to help you think through, okay, I've got this concern, I've got this worry about work, how can I address that, and think about what you could possibly do. And of course, someone like your line manager will be really helpful in that process, particularly if the concern, let's think about this in terms of the workplace, how worried you are, and the line manager understanding how worried you are can really smooth that process as you're starting a return to work journey, because they can help you to resolve those worries and concerns and head things off at the pass. So start to collect what your worries and concerns are, and start to think about how you're going to address them. Okay, and then the next thing to think about is thinking about the impact of your symptoms in the workplace, and keeping your employer and your line manager in the loop with those. So I think we often do think about symptoms because we're experiencing them, and we know what they are, but then what we're asking you to do here really is to reflect on, well, what would those symptoms look like in the workplace? How does that symptom play out, if you like? How would it look? So I've given some examples here. So fatigue is a really common symptom that the patients that we work with will express. And when you're thinking about fatigue, but in the context of the workplace, We think about issues like concentration, about focus, about perhaps communication difficulties, tip of the tongue sort of scenario, and then also about maybe slower mental processing, because when you're very tired, it can actually be very difficult to concentrate and to think straight and to problem solve. So thinking about fatigue in the workplace, it would be really helpful for your line manager to understand, look, when I get really tired, I sometimes really struggle to find my words. That's sort of a sign and symptom really that I need to stop and go for a walk, or stop and take a breather, go and have a cup of tea, or perhaps even reflect on whether the return to work plan I've got is actually too difficult for me at the minute. So fatigue, but how it manifests itself is really important to think about, and what, for example, your line manager will see in your day-to-day work. But also thinking about other symptoms such as neuropathy in your hands or maybe your feet, and thinking about, well, how does that going to impact on my work and my capacity to do my job? So thinking about dexterity and sort of thinking about your job role, does it require fine motor skills, for example? Are you a physiotherapist who does lots of hands-on kind of massage kind of work? You're using your hands. Are you doing a lot of typing in your job, where you've got to move very quickly and your fingers are getting really stiff and very tingly? What about if you're writing? What about if you're doing a lot of walking? You're working in a shop, for example, and you're doing lots and lots of walking around the shop floor. So it's kind of important, again, to think about that symptom in the context of work. But then also thinking other symptoms such as anxiety and low mood. So again, we find that people who are experiencing those symptoms often have issues of concentration, have difficulties in terms of focus, maybe relationship difficulties, because often people can get quite snappy, quite irritable, or they can start to withdraw from other people and not speak to them as much, not get as engaged, maybe turning their video off on Zoom meetings and this sort of thing, where you're doing very visual work. And they might also feel quite lethargic and really struggle for motivation. So, if you're explaining to your line manager, like, I'm experiencing, some anxiety, contextualise it for them, sort of make them understand what that looks like for you. So, for example, when I get really fed up, I just tend to withdraw. So if you see me not really wanting to put my video on, that might be a sign or symptom that I'm really having quite a bad day. So it's kind of helping the line manager to understand what your needs are, and to think about that translation of what that symptom might look like in the workplace setting. And again, for example, pain, if you're experiencing pain, you might experience limited body movement. It might take you a while, for example, to get up in the morning, and maybe starting at 9 is just really tricky. And if you explain that to your line manager and say, look, is there any chance, particularly when I'm on my phased return, that maybe I can just start work a little bit later, because I get really stiff in the morning, and I'm okay by about 10, half 10 once I've been moving around for a while, but I just find the initial waking up very difficult. But it could also be about sitting for long periods of time. So if you're in a role where you've got an awful lot of meetings, maybe you're a line manager and you're managing like 10, 15 staff, and some, and you've got lots and lots of back-to-back meetings, or you've got an open diary where people can put loads of meetings in without your control. Think about what that might look like for you in the context, for example, of sitting for long periods of time. If you find that quite difficult from a pain perspective, think about again how you're going to explain that to your workplace and to your colleagues. That kind of goes back to that idea of managing expectations and thinking, okay, I'm going to you'll see me putting admin breaks in quite regularly. I need that time to get up and move around because I find it very difficult if I'm sitting for long periods of time. And then the final point I've mentioned there is just alerting your organisation and your line manager when there is any future surgery, for example, any future treatments planned, or if you've got a regular slot with a psychotherapist, for example, or a physio, just letting them know when those appointments are, and particularly in the early stages of a phased return to work plan, building those in as part of that plan. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to focus on is exercise and work. So when we're working with people and we're supporting them back into the workplace, a key part of that is helping people to build up their strength and stamina, to increase their movement, to increase their activity, and to help them to exercise. And what we find is people get into really good rhythms with exercise. They go for regular walks, they up the length of the walk, the speed of the walk. They might even start running or playing tennis again, or doing things that they've enjoyed, like swimming, for example. And they make time for that in their diaries, and they effectively and efficiently have exercise as just a routine part of everyday life. When we're starting planning to return to work, though, what we notice is that engagement in exercise and activity actually starts to drop off. Oftentimes because people feel there isn't the time to do it in their day as work ramps up, or they feel that it's almost in competition because work itself is very demanding and draining, and they don't feel like they've got the energy to do activity and exercise within their weeks. There's lots of different reasons, but we do often see a drop off and a decline in exercise and activity. And the reason why I've mentioned it in this slide here and in this presentation is because exercise is really important that we enable you to continue to do, and to make sure that we keep you as active as possible, because there's a lot of research evidence now that suggests that exercise should almost be prescribed. It is almost a treatment. It helps to reduce mortality and morbidity, and it's incredibly good for you for all sorts of different reasons, both physical and psychological. So the reason for putting it here in this slide at this point is think about, okay, well, how are you going to keep exercising and moving your body whilst at work and when you're planning a return to work? So I've just thought about some ideas here. For example, if you've got a commute, can you walk to work? Or if you have no commute and you're working from home, could you go around the block as if it was a commute and then come back in and start your day? Could you get up and move around at lunchtime, and could you take a walk in the dog, for example, or just taking a nice stroll for yourself to get away from the office, away from the desk, and keep you moving? It doesn't have to be long, 20-25 minutes, even 10 minutes I'd be delighted for, that's fine. Just keep regular bits of movement. We talk about snacking a lot, exercise snacking a lot in our company, and just grabbing those times when you can just keep active. It's also worthwhile looking at what the Wellbeing offering is through your organisation and thinking, well, what's available to me to do in the context of exercise and movement? So they might, for example, have online yoga or Tai Chi, for example, or even other exercise and movement kind of based webinars. So it's worthwhile kind of dialing into those or taking advantage of those. You might also find that you have access to a gym, for example, as part of your perks and benefits. It's well worth looking into what your perks and benefits are, because a lot of organisations have a lot on offer for their staff. So have a look at what's available. But whilst you're in work, you could also do practical things like taking the stairs. You could, rather than taking the lift, just kind of go up level by level, reduce the amount that you rely on the lift to get you up to those top floors. Or you could make sure that you wander to the furthest bathroom, or you get up regularly and make yourself a cup of tea. And just keep getting up and down from your desk, for example. And also just thinking about what exercise and activity can you do and continue to do even whilst you've gone back to work. So, for example, any sports stuff that you did, riding your bike, walking, swimming, could be yoga, could be Pilates, could be ballet, could be the hockey club you used to belong to, anything and everything. Just really think about when you can pick that up again and you can get involved in just moving your body. And making that as part of almost the return to work plan, thinking to yourself, how am I going to keep moving? How am I going to keep moving? What am I going to do to keep myself active? Okay, so the next thing to think about, and I've sort of touched on it briefly already, but think about what appointments you have and thinking about how you're going to factor those in as part of a return to work plan. So think about any hospital visits, physiotherapy, psychotherapy, any alternative therapies, anything you've got ongoing that you need to be attending, any reviews, mammograms, any other sort of medical appointments. Could be other appointments as well that you need to put in as part of your return to work plan. And just remember sort of the obligations really of your employer with regards to the Equality Act and reasonable adjustments, and your employer is obliged to support you when you return to work and to consider all reasonable adjustments to enable you to return to work. And it's called reasonable adjustments kind of for a reason, because it's got to be very broad in its remit, because what's reasonable for a small company might not be reasonable for a FTSE 100, for example, company. So it's kind of a very broad grey area of what reasonable is. But it's the most crucial point, I think, is actually letting your employer know what support you need and the reasons why, according to your symptom experience, for example, because the moment an employer knows, then they're obliged under the Equality Act to provide or to consider providing that support for you under this auspice of reasonable adjustments. So I've put in here this concept of work-life balance. Some people think it shouldn't be a balance, it should be on a continuum. But I think what's really important in here of all of these pieces of the pie is to think about fun. And just to remember that F word is really, really crucial, and it can get lost when one starts to think about getting back into the workplace and getting back into that sort of everyday routine. People can find it very all-consuming at times, and we've just got to remember to introduce that balance and keep that balance going all the way through, even when you're back at work full-time. And just thinking about how are you accommodating all these areas of your life to enable your your good mental and physical well-being. But fun's important. It's important to be having a laugh with your friends. It's important to be doing stuff that you enjoy, to getting pleasure out of life as well, because all that stuff that can offset any stressors that you experience. So, you know, if nothing else from this session, just think about how you're going to put the F word into as part of your return to work journey. How you're going to make sure that you get that work-life balance. I've seen too many cases in the past where people have put all of their eggs in one basket in the sense of their energy and efforts into work, and it's all consuming, and then it becomes very exhausting, because we need to be able to offset that with exercise, with fun, with our family, with our friends, with stuff that we enjoy doing as well. One of the things that often comes up when we're starting to work with someone and supporting them with their return to work journey is actually, how do I go about it? How do I go about connecting with work? And sometimes people will say to us, you know, I've not been in contact with my workplace for like 8 months. I just haven't heard from my line manager at all. You know, it feels really awkward now. What do I do? How do I go about it? Other people might be, they've just had a diagnosis and they might be thinking, what do I do about work? How do I have that conversation? Should I be having that conversation? How do I introduce it or bring it up? And it's really important to think about the idea that it's useful to think about contacting your workplace as early on as possible. So even if it's just immediately post-diagnosis, just keeping in touch with work. It's not about planning your return to work or being under any pressure to return. It's the opposite, actually. It's just keeping information channels flowing between you and your line manager, for example, so that sort of everybody's sort of up to speed broadly where you are at in your treatment pathway, for example, or how you're feeling. And what we'll say to people is often it's easier to tell a story of like the past month of what's happened to you as opposed to a 6 or 8 month, or even once you finish treatment. It's a very long part of the journey, if you like, to have to then explain. Whereas if you've been in contact regularly, say every month, every 6 weeks, then actually it's only that piece of the jigsaw puzzle to fill in, not the whole story. Because it can sometimes be very difficult having to relive all of that stuff, which you can just keep people informed all the way along. We find that people find that a lot easier, and the level of conversation is often just like, yeah, I'm doing well, I'm okay, I'm on my 3rd round of chemo, or due to start radiotherapy, or I'm just waiting for more results, or, you know, how's it been at work, what updates have there been, oh right, got new colleagues, great, or yeah, can I just maybe dial into that meeting, or if you record it, can I watch it? You know, it doesn't have to be anything really heavy duty, nor about the specific content of your job even, but just keeping in contact with the employer to keep in the loop really about what's been happening. So it's important to think about what your needs are in that regard. Everybody is different. Everybody has different needs, and I think it's important that line managers might also predict what your needs are, and they're probably based on what they think they would like. So it's really important that you have that conversation and say, no, actually, this is what I'd like. This is what would be really helpful. Would that work for you too? So I've got loads of examples, but I do remember one of a lady trying to return, thinking about returning to work, and she was really perplexed. I've worked at this organisation for like 20 years, and I expected more. I expected to be in contact, but it's really odd because every time I contact my line manager, she's back in contact with me within 24 hours, and yet it will just go on for ages until I hear from them again. And we kind of unpicked it because she was getting kind of a bit distraught about it and a bit frustrated and quite worried. And whilst we didn't have the line manager in the room with us, we sort of predicted what do we think was going on. The fact that the line manager responded so quickly once the person had been in contact with them, so it suggested to me that actually the line manager was waiting to hear and wanted to leave the person to have the space that they needed. So they predicted that's what this person, my patient, wanted. And in actual fact, she was the opposite. She wanted a little bit of contact. She wanted to be able to keep in touch. So it was a really good example of good intentions and actually just missing the mark. So I think it's really important that there's that line of communication between you two, between yourself and your line manager, to just understand what each other's needs are. It's also really useful to keep in contact with colleagues. They are a form of social support. They're probably caring for you and concerned for you. But equally, sometimes colleagues can be overwhelming. There's lots of texting going on. Are you okay? And you might be thinking, I just don't need this level of help. It's overwhelming, but they're so lovely. What do I do? So again, it's like communication about what would be beneficial to you and what would be supportive to you, and to think about how, you know, you can ensure that your needs are met in all of this. But it is really useful to keep in contact with colleagues because it's social support, and that's really, really important for you. But this last point is actually really important as well, in that sense of what you're like on the outside might not be like what's going on the inside. And we hear that a lot in terms of, you know, people will say, you look so well, crikey, you're doing really well, look, cool, you know, that sort of fantastic, I'm so pleased you look well. But often that looking well on the outside can mask an awful lot of what's going on the inside, which could be that you're still in pain, it could be that you're really tired, it could be you're really worried about a recurrence of cancer, it could be any other worries that you have. But from the outside you look okay, and the inside maybe you're wobbling a bit. And I think it's really important that gets communicated and say, look, I might look well, but I don't always feel it. And I think it's important that you know that, so you can help me. So even when the phase return kicks in, you understand where I'm coming from. And even as I'm back on work full time, there might still be some dialogue between the two of you of explaining when you're having a bad day. Because, you know, there is sometimes that misunderstood expectation or understanding, and it's useful just to iron all of that out. And that's where the expectation management comes in that I was talking about earlier. You know, thinking about what you can do, setting out your stall, making sure your line manager knows what you can do, and that there isn't that kind of misunderstanding between the two of you. Okay, so let's think about the structure of a phased return to work. So what is a phased return to work plan? Well, essentially, it is a plan of action over a course of weeks, and the number of weeks varies according to individuals. Sometimes the plans are fixed at 6 to 8 weeks. There's no reason why they need to be. It's more about your individual needs and what you need to happen week on week in terms of building up your strength and stamina to be able to do your job role. So essentially, it's a structured approach to gradually reintroducing you back into the workplace, back into your job, and increasing the number of hours you do. So often the common features of return to work plan are your job content and the tasks you'll be doing in the days that you return, and then the hours and the days that you will be returning. So there's kind of two core parts, and those parts can have movable pieces to it. So you'll be gradually increasing the hours, and you might be gradually increasing your job content and adding new bits in each week, for example. What your employer needs to do under the Equality Act, as I touched on before, is to consider what adjustments might need to be made. So, for example, if you're working in a really busy call centre and you normally take, or for argument's sake, 15 calls an hour, you might only take 2 or 3 calls an hour. And that would be classified as like a reasonable adjustment given your ability to concentrate, the stress of the call, the tiring nature of the call, and actually what could be reasonably expected of you to do in that time frame. And then as you go through your return to work plan, you might find that the number of calls increases, for example. So continue with that example of a call centre. There can be other adjustments. So, for example, people who might have a client list, they might just work on 1 key client as opposed to 5 that they normally would. Or if they've got a very demanding role that's very deadline orientated, so for example in accounting, where it's month end, for example, it might be that rather than going into that process, maybe there's a project that always been needed to be done, and it's been sitting kind of gathering dust on a shelf. Now's the time to dust it down, because it could be that you could do a project that's really important for the team, but just something that previously no one's had the time to do, and it could be an ideal project for you to cut your teeth on as you're getting back into work and you're increasing your cognitive capability and concentration and focus and getting back into the groove of work. And it can be really helpful to think about project work like that, because that's often tasks that aren't time bound, they're not people bound, they have no boundaries in the sense of you can take control of that project and deliver, just you and your line manager having agreed deadlines without necessarily any other variables coming into play. So it can be really helpful. So in terms of how you create the plan, I would just be very methodical about it, and get a nice structured approach and just think through the different elements that you might need to do. So really have a look at your job description and think about what your job role was when you left. It might have adjusted slightly since you've been off. There's been a global pandemic, there might have been impact on that on your job role. But just thinking about what that is between you and your employer, and thinking how, what does my role now look like at home? It's not been done at home yet because I've not been there doing it. What does that look like? And between the two of you, working out how you can make those accommodations and phase yourself gently back into the role again. Okay. So there are some key factors that you need to think about when you're creating a return to work plan. And actually, I've been gradually discussing those throughout this presentation already. And really, it's just coming and bringing all those factors together as you're planning. So you might want to have a section in your plan of symptoms. What symptoms you're experiencing? So that table that you had right at the beginning, you might want to think about putting that in the plan. What are the symptoms that I'm experiencing, and what support do I need from my employer to help me to manage those in the workplace setting? Factor in, as you're doing your week-on-week plan, when you've got appointments with the physio, when you've got reviews or checkups, when you've got maybe upcoming surgery. Thinking about all of that can be really helpful. People often say to me, should I wait till my surgery is over and then go back to work? And I would say, depending on when the surgery is, sometimes it can be just very advantageous to get back to work when you're ready, and that happens to be now. Then you're going to be off again in a couple of months' time. So long as that's okay with the business, I would say think about how you could get back to work now, because I think work is so beneficial, providing that structure, providing that social support, providing financial remuneration. It can be very, very useful for you to think about it, and then you take a pause while you're going through surgery and recovering, and then come back into work again. So sometimes you don't always want to put these things off. And again, that's a conversation to be had with your line manager, what's feasible and what's doable from your perspective and from the business's perspective. So it's about thinking, time off for appointments, but also thinking about that job role, content, daily activities, what will that look like? And then just creating step by step, a week by week plan of your hours and your activities. Okay, so once you have your plan in place, what's really important is that you keep having regular updates and conversations with your line manager around how it's going, because it's important to make sure that you are actually coping with what's been set out in the plan, that the jobs that you're engaging in as part of your job description are doable, that the amount of time that you're spending on them is doable. So for example, if you put down 4 mornings a week to work between 9 and 12, but actually you're really struggling to get up at 9 because of stiffness, as I mentioned earlier, and you want to shove it back to 9:30 or 10, for example, and just shift it back just a little bit, it's really useful if you're having weekly dialogue with your line manager. Actually, I'm really struggling with this. Do you mind if we just move the whole lot back by half an hour, because that would just make life easier? I think there's a lot of trial and error sometimes in a return to work plan, and that regular review is a really important part of the process. So keeping your employer in the loop with your symptoms can give the support that you'll need to help you go through your plan, and it's also really useful for them to understand what you're experiencing so they can then help you. Remember, that's what the Equality Act is all about as well. If they know what you're experiencing, then they can put things in place to make your life easier, to improve your quality of life, to help move the return to work plan along. And part of that can actually be wellbeing action plans, and that is just drafting up a document between the two of you as to what your needs are and how the employer can meet them. So ongoing support whilst you're going through the phased return to work is important, as is support once you're even back at work full time and everything's going well. Still kind of regularly checking in on your health needs, and health at work needs is really, really important. Okay, so I've just put a couple of links in here which you may find useful. The first one is to the Neuroendocrine Cancer website, and the second is to ACAS, which is an organisation that can help you if you have any work-related questions. I hope that today and this session has been useful for you. I think it's useful when you've been through a webinar like this to actually just pause and go, actually, what's been useful for you as you've been watching this? What stood out for you? What's given you pause to think? How can you use this information as you kind of enter back into work, whether you're at that phase of nowhere near it, or thinking about it, or planning it, or actioning it, or back at work full time. It's useful just to keep reflecting, actually, what are my needs at work, and how can I make sure that they're met, and enable that smooth return to work. And then to also think about, what are your next steps after this webinar? What could you do next as a result of listening in today? Could it be reaching out to your colleagues? Could it be reaching out to your line manager to get a conversation going? Could it be actually reviewing and revising the return to work plan that you've got because it's just not quite right? Just have a think about what your next steps might be. Okay, so thank you ever so much for listening in today. Do get in touch if you'd like to, and I wish you well on your return to work journeys. Thank you.